Welcome to the Staying Active podcast, brought to you by Active Health, Connecticut's premier preventive health center.
Well, welcome back to Staying Active. I'm Derek Marcette. That, of course, is Dr. John Liss. Just had a very exciting technology, fun times. Audio, video. We're both obviously audio-visual engineers, so this is very good. John, we were talking before. I'm overly excited, probably a little too motivated to discuss the topic of sarcopenia, so much that I prematurely gave the episode a title, Sarcopenia, the Silent Aging Accelerator.
Ooh,
I
like that.
I'm always up for a good sarcopenia talk, and I recognize that most people have no idea what that is, and that makes me sad and infuriates me at the same time. So why don't we just jump in here and kind of just like talk about it for what it is. Sarcopenia is muscle loss, right? It's age-related muscle loss, which is kind of an uncomfortable truth about humans, is that we all experience this one way or another. And I figure I'll hand it over to you quick to kind of do some of the definitions a little bit, but I anticipate being a little excited today. So let's get after it.
This is going to be awesome. I think this is really blends to the overlap between kind of the medical side of things, the training side of things, because there is just absolute gold here for the discussion. But you're right. So it's not something people really think about, but if, using the term, if you kind of break it down into its component parts, sarcopenia has the sarco part, which involves the muscle, like the muscle cell is the sarcomere. Sarco for sarcopenia, I don't know if it's Latin or Greek or whatever, but it's some ancient language it means muscle. And then penia, anything in penia in medicine means like a low amount of. So leukopenia, low white blood cells, lymphopenia, same thing, low lymphocytes, sarcopenia, low muscle mass. And so we do see this, most often as people live longer. It's not strictly isolated to older populations. But by the kind of best guess for our, epidemiology colleagues is about somewhere between 5 to 10% of Americans have some form of sarcopenia, which is, if we think about a country of 350, 400 million people, that's a lot of people. So, we see it very frequently. We see it almost on a daily basis clinically. I'm sure you see it a lot in the people that you train, and that's one of the reasons probably why they're training.
I hope so.
It's a really big deal. And you're like, some people might be listening or watching and thinking, okay, so I have a little bit of low muscle mass. So what, right? So I'm not Arnold Schwarzenegger. So what? And we don't need you to be prime Arnie, but in terms of, there are so many things, and we can kind of double click on this a little bit more. But from the standpoint of metabolic health, skeletal health, your functioning, extending health span as opposed to lifespan, but also extending lifespan. Maintaining a normal or ideally a high muscle mass will, it can't be understated, the importance of that.
Well, sarcopenia is interesting because, you're talking about the loss of strength, and you're talking about like 8 to 10% number, right? One of the things that people don't realize is sarcopenia it can affect everybody, right? It just kind of depends on what you're doing, because it is like age related, and it starts in most people around 30. And if you don't do anything about it, we're talking about upwards of 10%, 8%, right? Muscle loss every 10 years. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so if you think about it, if you do the math, right, say you're at 100% at age 30, you lose 10% per year. By age 80, you're down 50% of your muscle mass. And if you were not, 100% to begin with, say you were like in the 80th percentile, you're now down to the 30th percentile, right? You're for total muscle mass. And that's where things can really go south very quickly. So not only important to build it when you're young and when it's easier to, although you can build muscle at any age. And there have been studies of people doing, nonagenarians, people in their 90s building muscle. But it's important to maintain that throughout the aging process, so that you're not just, building a mountain and then just letting it fall off a cliff.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely getting to it earlier, right? When you have more to use is important. And I think one of the factors here in this particular discussion, people are always like, oh, well, of course you want to start when you're younger. Like it's a little bit more than that. Like sarcopenia is really scary to me because it's not just like you're losing muscle mass. You like mentioned like Arnold Schwarzenegger, bodybuilding. Like we're not talking about that. I'm talking about the ability to get out of a chair. I'm talking about like deep skeletal tissue that allows you to do baseline activities. Like losing 10% of your like functional foundational muscle mass is horrifying to me. And my question for you for the clinical and medical side is like, why does nobody talk about this? It feels to me, I've been doing this for almost 20 years, John. It's been a long time and I've learned a lot and I continue to learn more. And it is crazy to me that people do not know what this is. They do not talk about it. It is not on their radar at all. What is going on there?
That's a really good question. It is, I think people just assumed that this was kind of like some unavoidable aspect of aging, that you had to, everyone sees these, just to use a colloquialism, these little old ladies, walk around with, they've got, just these really thin arms and, not much muscle mass. And the same for men, right? That obviously can happen for men too. But that was just kind of, it was taken for granted that just an inevitable part of the aging process. Additionally, more studies have come out, and initially this was not something that was very well studied, but a lot more studies have come out about the importance of avoiding sarcopenia and how that is an independent risk factor for falls, for low bone density or osteopenia, right? Osteo meaning bone, penia the same as sarcopenia. So for falls, balance, health span, even metabolic effects, right? Your blood glucose, lipid profile, all these things are improved by having an adequate muscle mass. It just took a little bit of time for us to actually prove that. Not that really anyone needed to, your grandma could have, or grandpa could have told you like, yeah, if you're stronger, you're going to be able to do more. That's been kind of known since like ancient times, but like, of course we need to put a label on it and now study it a little bit more. And I think it's kind of just slowly trickling into the mainstream a little bit more, but it's not something we were really taught in medical school. It's not something that the classic medical dogma really focuses on, which is, again, like you said, it's really sad because it's entirely treatable. This is an entirely treatable condition, and which makes it like just maddening that people ignore this.
Yeah, and you just said a bunch of things that I'm like, oh man, I can go so many different directions with this, and I'm gonna do my best to keep my insane ranting to a tasteful minimum.
But we're here for the ranting, though. We're here for the ranting.
Well, I don't want it to go too far off the tracks, but I mean, you're talking about osteopenia, and I mean, it's unfortunate, but we live in a world of definitions, right? And osteopenia is probably the most recent one that I can think of that has benefited from a definition change, right? Osteopenia was not considered like disease or anything like that. It was just like, it's just part of aging. And there didn't used to be any interventions for it. I don't remember exactly when. I think it was like the 60s and 70s. Like it kind of started to become popular. I know in like 2009, a bunch of new studies started coming out where people were just honestly just mad about the lack of definition and how it still wasn't being taken seriously, in universities and hospitals. And it's one of those things where, why not sarcopenia? Why not study this, right? I have a whole tirade about anabolic steroids, and not for anything. When you look at drug profiles, you think risk versus reward. Is this going to hurt this person more than it is going to help them, or vice versa? And for me, I look at that and I'm like, we have no idea. We just started being okay with testosterone like 2 minutes ago, right? and so to sit here and be like, oh, anabolic steroids, they're bad. I'm like, well, yeah, because we've been making them in your uncle's bathtub since the 60s, right? It's the same stuff, right?
Right.
I don't mean to be like over the top here, but it's like, when you make something a Schedule 1 drug, you don't get anything out of the studies. You just say, nope, that's taboo. We don't look at it. And I look at sarcopenia as like a no duh. If you've got somebody who's 80 years old and their metabolic health is failing, and it's largely because they've lost over 50% of their skeletal tissue over the last 30 years, I wonder what would immediately help this person.
Yeah.
Obviously it's more skeletal tissue, but it's just out of reach at that point, to the point where, like, I hate that thought where you're just like, well, just let them live their life. They're happy. Like, they could be a lot happier. They could be way better if they had this skeletal tissue.
Yeah, and that really goes back to the point of everyone wants to live a long life, but nobody wants to live a long life in poor health. And this
Hmm.
is having adequate skeletal muscle is one of the best ways to ensure that you both live a long life or give yourself the best chance for a long life, but also for a life in good function, in good health. And that is something it is becoming a lot easier now to measure than ever before as well. You can also there are some scoring systems and we can talk about those. You can also just look at someone you can get a good sense of if they're kind of
Yeah.
binary, are they under muscled or adequately muscled. But things like in-body scanners or DEXA or MRI are becoming a lot more accessible for people to actually directly measure the skeletal muscle. And so that's an easy way for us to kind of, objectively see where a patient is and then track it over time. The famous Peter Drucker quote, what gets measured gets managed, is
Yeah.
entirely applicable to muscle mass as well. And
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's not easy to fix necessarily, just from the standpoint of it involves work, unless we get these myostatin inhibitor drugs, cleared, which I
Yeah.
think is, if it's going to happen, probably 10 years away.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
what's the safety profile they're going to be? But like exercise, we've been doing it forever and it works. And like eating protein, we've been doing it forever and it works. And it's like, risk versus harm, or risk versus benefit rather. It's like it's a no-brainer. It's so asymmetric in favor of benefit that it's I feel like a broken record here, but
Yeah.
it's just, you need to be doing it.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, so we can obviously have other episodes and we can talk anabolic steroids and myostatin inhibitors. That's something I'm also super interested in, and I think not a lot of people know a lot about. I don't know if it's appropriate for this particular episode because I don't want to like get away from the subject matter too much. But I want to be clear, I'm not advocating for the use of anabolic steroids, especially not as they are currently in existence. I'm simply trying to voice my frustration with something that we know quite a bit about, and it is a very real thing, and it is a very real issue for many people. And when we talk about metabolic health, we're almost directly referencing how much muscle mass you have, right? That's a big factor. And so I just want to be clear about that. But to kind of get us back on track a little bit, I throw around, around 30, 8 to 10% per year, or per 10 years, right? Not per year. That would be crazy. You'd be an inverse person. Yeah. Uh, let's talk a little bit about some of the like what's inevitable versus what's preventable, and then like muscle mass versus muscle function, because I feel like a lot of people get caught up in the aesthetic value of muscle and not enough in the like functional foundational value. Um, so I want to talk about that a little bit if we could.
Yeah. So I think, kind of in reverse order, I think it's pretty well established that muscle mass is not equal to muscle function. You can have someone who's almost like the SpongeBob episode of Anchor Arms, right? He's got these big inflatable
Yeah,
arm
that's
muscles, but he
right.
can't lift a stick with two marshmallows on it. It's similar kind of principle there. It, by and large, though, if you do, they trend well together. So it's very difficult to be very adequately muscled in terms of mass and be very weak, like on both ends of the extreme. Um, and similarly, it's not as easy to be very under muscled in terms of muscle mass and be very strong in terms of your objective strength, muscle function. So they do kind of, they move closely together, but they are not the same thing. They're independent, but closely related, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And then I'm going to pull a complete blank. I forget what the first part of your question was. to go through the definitions.
No, you're good. It was just pertaining to inevitable versus preventable.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yes. So inevitable versus preventable. So this is something, again, I'm pretty passionate about. Is although it is more difficult, I'll leave this kind of higher level to start. Although it is more difficult to build muscle the longer you live, and so it's harder to build muscle, say, in your 80s than it is in your 20s, it is not impossible. And in fact, it is doable. And we've proven that there's been studies with 90-year-old women who they've assigned a regimen of resistance training and high protein diet, and they've gained muscle. So it is likely inevitable that you will be less efficient at building muscle, and you may require a little bit more recovery time in between your training. You may lose a little bit of some of the fast twitch muscle fibers compared to when you were younger. Perhaps the slow twitch seem to atrophy a lot slower. So some of that, there is some, just in terms of how efficiently you build muscle and how efficiently you recover. Yes, there's some inevitability to that, but it is not something that it is not inevitable to have sarcopenia or low muscle mass. You can build muscle at any age. It is a little bit more difficult to do so. But it's certainly not, it's not unavoidable. And I think that's a really important point to make. The training maybe looks a little bit different from a practical standpoint, like from what you recommend to patients and clients. But anyone who is listening right now unequivocally can gain muscle mass, full stop.
Yeah, I talk to people about this a lot because I think anytime you build muscle at any age is an opportunity to celebrate. I think it's a really, really cool thing, especially after 30, like roundabout, let's say between 25 and 35, depending on some genetic factors, right? It starts to kickstart right around then. I think anytime you build any amount of muscle, that's pretty cool because you're kind of fighting this monster every day, right? It's going to show up and it's going to take its pound of flesh, for a lack of a better term, right? And any amount that you gain is the net value, right? So you built muscle on top of whatever you otherwise might have lost as well. And I think that's really important to remember, is that like that effort you're putting in is you're beating it, you're winning. And it's got to be one of those things that is just forever. And that's where I think data is your best friend, right? Whether you are a DEXA scan person and you want all of the information, you want all the data, or you're an in-body person and you want to say, I want a really good measurement of water, skeletal muscle, and fat mass, right? You get that data on a regular basis and you can fight and win that battle pretty regularly, regardless of your age, right? It's an adaptive mechanism. And so what you do, right? It just matters what you can recover from, and what you can recover from, you will get better from, you will improve from, right? And I mean, there's so many cool studies about exercise science right now, just with regard to adaptability. There's so many cool ones because we're looking at volume of work, volume of effort, and it's like, does it end? It's basically whatever you can recover from, you will grow from, you will get better from. And so, like, I don't want to say the limit doesn't exist, but it's looking pretty cool, right? There's not enough time.
Right.
So it's just really interesting, and, kind of put a cap on this as far as like the inevitability versus the preventability. If you're a person and you're not getting that data on a regular basis, it's going to be really, really hard for you to tell, what's happening. Am I, having issues with sarcopenia? There's a really good way to tell. You're not going to notice when you lose 5 pounds of muscle over the course of 5 to 10 years. You're not gonna. But you are going to notice when those stairs start to get really hard to climb, when it starts to get, that feeling of getting out of the chair. And by then, you're going to wish you started earlier. And I don't wish that on anybody. I don't want that for any person. So let's cut into some of the nerd stuff a little bit, right? Because we're talking about muscle right now, and that's a slippery slope, my friend. So far we've talked a little bit about independence. We could probably talk about fall prevention, which is a huge one. I mean, if we're talking health span, we're talking about quality of life on top of longevity, right? These are big factors, but what about like the metabolic effects of the muscle loss? Like what's happening to this person?
Great. Yeah, that's a great question. So metabolically, the muscle is, and we've touched on this a little bit in prior episodes, but to dive a little bit deeper, muscle serves as a phenomenal sink for blood glucose. When you have sugar floating around in the body, the muscle loves to use it if the muscle is in motion, right? If you're just sedentary and you're not doing anything, the muscle doesn't need to really use all that much. But if you're very active, if you're exercising, strength training, cardio, the exercise piece, and in particular resistance training, your muscle is going to use it to obviously do the work itself. But as the muscle grows, as you recover, as you mentioned, from the exercise, and as the sarcomeres or muscle cells enlarge, as they gain capacity to use energy, they're going to be working for you even while you sleep with larger muscles, right? You need a certain level, like a level of, basal insulin use, or basal glucose use rather, to just have the muscles survive. And so if you have more muscle mass, you have essentially a bigger sink, a bigger reservoir, a bigger buffer that glucose can hide in, essentially. So you don't have to use as much insulin to get it out of circulation, and you are more metabolically healthy, simply from the standpoint of what we call insulin sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one of the major pieces, from the metabolism wise, as to why people get healthier. There's also, and as it relates to insulin signaling, to get a little bit technical, there are also hormones that are involved in lipogenesis, or the creation of fat, that are turned off with lower insulin levels, which is kind of like a secondary effect from higher muscle mass. So
Mm-hmm.
there are a few ways that higher muscle mass help you. The glucose and lower blood glucose, insulin sensitivity is more of a kind of primary effect. You get also these secondary effects with kind of fat mass, fat utilization, that are really important. Not necessarily related to metabolism in terms of like energy use, but your bones are also, very,
Big one.
very important, from the standpoint of how you regulate calcium, vitamin D, and just how, like, stressing the bones, similar to the muscle, you recover from it, the bone becomes stronger. The bone's just not some dumb, uh, reservoir of calcium. It's got nerves, it's got connections from the ligaments to the bone to the muscle, all talking to each other, being like, okay, we survived a 200-pound bench press. Next time we need to be prepared for 205 pounds. Let's
Mm-hmm.
strengthen up. How do we do that? And so that is another way that, like, as the muscles grow, the bones will another kind of secondary effect from the metabolic perspective, a primary effect from the skeletal perspective, as to how, avoiding sarcopenia is important, how building muscle mass is important.
Sure, sure. So we're talking, we're talking about the ability to utilize fat efficiently, right? We're
Hmm.
talking about the ability to remove or utilize glucose efficiently, right? See our past episode on insulin resistance. Hey, quick plug. We're talking about the adaptability and responsiveness of your bones. All right. What about cognitively? What about your mental, emotional health?
That's a phenomenal question. If you've ever exercised and done something where you've noticed that you are kind of at your limit, you're spent, you got that kind of quote unquote runner's high or exercise high, you might notice that you feel really good. You've got a mood boost both in the moment right after you've worked out. But studies show that that effect persists. And in fact, there have been, in the last 10 years, several big studies that have shown that exercise is just as good, if not better in some cases, to certain antidepressants that we have called SSRIs. And so this is a really, again, talking about risk versus benefit. Exercise has so many benefits. Are there risks to it? Maybe injury, but if you're doing it smartly, the risk is essentially null.
Yeah.
And so if this is very clearly something that helps mood, very clearly something that helps cognition as well. We've seen studies where people perform better on cognitive tests if they have, as it relates to things like their how active they were, their VO2 max, things like that. So both from the standpoint of immediately right after, of course, you get that runner's high, but also that effect persists for, upwards of 24 hours or more after exercise, the mood benefit and the cognitive benefit. And in fact, if we're talking about avoiding dementia, which a lot of our older patients in particular really scare them, dementia is a scary diagnosis. One of the best ways we can do it is exercise, is being kind of ensuring that you are doing some form of exercise, and often that includes resistance training that avoids sarcopenia. So the muscle building piece, the avoidance of sarcopenia piece, is very closely related to, as you said, mood improvement, cognitive improvement. Again, another full stop.
It's almost as if having muscle is a value to most people.
Yeah, I mean, not even just like, I think people also like the aesthetics, right? Like if people are more adequately muscled, then they tend to feel better about themselves, and perhaps other people feel better about their appearance as well. That's like icing on the cake. But in terms of like the things that really matter for health span and longevity, are you thinking clearly? Are you in a good mood? Are you able to enjoy the great, functional body that you have in your long health span? There is almost, again, like you said, maybe there's a limit, but we really haven't found it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, we could talk about this forever. I'm trying to get into this without being coy, but it's just kind of funny to me because a lot of what we discuss is pretty loaded in like lifestyle / environmental triggers, right? And I know that this is another one of them. Sarcopenia is largely lifestyle driven. While it is a constant, right? It is like a phenomenon that like happens, right? We know about it. It's going to happen, but I don't want to call it easy, but like the fix for this is simple. We have the answers. You just need to go do the thing. And so without like being overly simplistic about it, right? Are there like is inactivity the biggest driver to this, or are there other factors such as, protein intake or like hormonal drivers? Like, is there other stuff that, kind of pushes this along, or just like hidden drivers that we don't talk about?
So that's a great question. I think certainly inactivity plays a major role, perhaps the major role, in conjunction with low protein intake. And I'll talk about that a little bit. But before I do that, some of the hidden drivers, yes, like as we talked about, kind of the inevitability of you just becoming less efficient at building muscle as you live longer. A lot of that is related to, in both men and women, changes in sex hormones. Estrogen is kind of a little bit more of a minor player with regards to muscle building, but still important. Testosterone, of course, is important both in men and women, but can decrease, and we often see it decrease with age. So, we see those, for lack of a better term, you're behind the 8 ball a little bit as you live longer, but it is, again, not something that is unable to be overcome. It just requires a little bit more due diligence, a little bit more effort, a little bit more dedication to the two main drivers of sarcopenia, which are inactivity, again, spending a lot of time on the couch, and not doing frank resistance training. And I hear a lot from patients, as kind of a non sequitur, but I hear a lot from patients like, oh, I'm very active. I'm not really sitting that much. I'm kind of out and about doing chores, doing yard work, that kind of thing. And that's great, but it is not the same thing as dedicated resistance training for building muscle, and as it relates to avoiding sarcopenia. Those are different things. I want you to stay active. I don't want you to be sedentary. But if you're not also doing some form of resistance training, you're not doing all that you can to avoid sarcopenia. So resistance training is huge. And then also the protein piece. It's the diet, the current kind of like guidelines from the FDA for kind of like recommended daily allowance of protein are far too low to overcome the inefficiency that people have as they live longer, for building muscle. And so
What do you think about that?
So that's, yeah, it's if we, what the studies are fairly clear on is that we need to have people, it's 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight is kind of what the current RDA is. In a kilogram being, 1 pound, 1 kilogram is 2.2 pounds. I don't really like to use kilograms because I can't really think like that and doing the conversion. So I do it per pound. But luckily the conversion is actually pretty simple. And it ultimately comes down to about a gram of protein per pound of body weight. And so that's kind of what aspirationally, what we'd like to get patients to allow a little wiggle room within the diet of, okay, maybe some days you undershoot, maybe some days you overshoot, but you're still within a good range to overcome the body's inefficiency level at building muscle. And as long as a patient does not have severe kidney disease, that level of protein is easily handled by the kidney. So there are really no worries from being, toxic to the kidney at a level of 1 gram per pound of body weight. But of course, before you're ramping up to that, and don't go straight into that either, it typically helps to kind of slowly ramp up to that just from a GI and intolerance perspective. But always talk to your doc if you're curious about, like, okay, what's my kidney function? Can my kidneys handle this? If your EGFR is above 60, meaning you don't have chronic kidney disease, yes, you can. It can handle it.
Mm. Yeah, that's great. I mean, so obviously inactivity being huge factor, right?
Yes.
Adequate protein intake, well known, got to do it, right? If you're sitting here and you're like, I'm 5'5", I'm 300 pounds, there's no chance I'm going to get 300 grams of protein. I would say, well, that, yeah, you're probably right, and that's probably not a healthy place to be. You're looking for, what does your skeletal muscle mass need? And so we're talking about a healthy person there, right? And so I would say use kind of averages, use norms, and shoot for that. Try to hit that 150 marker.
Right.
We touched on hormones a little bit, and I think it would be cool, we have a little bit of time left, just talking about as a tie-in, right? This is kind of a callback to our hormone replacement and testosterone replacement episode. Do women lose muscle faster after menopause? Is there anything going on there? I know that we talked about estrogen being kind of a minor player, but like, how minor are we talking, Doc?
So that's a little bit of a leading question, leading the witness, Your Honor. But the point is yes, women do lose muscle mass faster after menopause, and that effect is actually fairly significant. The effect is extremely significant on bone health, estrogen being extremely important for bone health. But as we've talked about, bone health and muscle health, osteopenia, sarcopenia, very closely related. And the kind of the direction, the arrow of causation kind of runs both ways, if you will. So it's really important for women in particular, if they are peri or postmenopausal, to focus very much on the resistance training and the adequate protein intake, because if they do not, the slope of acceleration of decline in muscle mass is much higher. It's a higher slope, meaning a steeper slope, and you will lose muscle mass much faster than a man would at a similar age. And so you're behind the 8 ball a little bit from that standpoint. But it is that is, if you are not doing things before menopause, then that is really a time to step it up into gear, your resistance training and your protein intake. And the studies are fairly clear on that. In fact, improving health span and longevity with higher protein intake, in particular over the age of 60 in both men and women.
Great. I want to finish this out with a couple of like more practical things if we could. So just kind of jump around a little bit here and we can just kind of tag back and forth. I want to talk early warning signs without kind of scaring the pants off people, right? I don't ever want to, fear monger people. I just want to give them something real. How would you know that this is starting? How would you have, like, what indicators would you use? And right off rip, first thing I would say is like decreasing grip strength is a really big factor. You know that you're starting to lose skeletal muscle mass if your grip is starting to go. And I'm not talking like, oh, I've injured my hand, so my grip is not what it used to be. Like, no, I mean like you're a healthy individual and you're just not able to like hold things as well as you used to. That's a big factor. A more obvious one is like slow to rise. You know, we have like the sit to stand test is a really good one. That tends to lean more towards like aging populations. If I were to get really like super real about this, if you're over 30 and you don't have a structured strength training routine, you're probably experiencing some amount of sarcopenia. That's kind of where I fall on that. You have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you're right. I think we need to be we can't be lenient about this, right? We can't be like, oh yeah, you're probably okay if you're like lifting here and there kind of thing. Like, no, you really need to have a structured exercise program. Starting earlier is much better, but it's never too late to start. And like you said, there are some more objective criteria. There is a score called the SARC-F score, and that's just an acronym. The SARC and F are just an acronym. You can look this up, anyone who's interested. But it goes through some of these things like, do you have any difficulty holding 10 pounds in your hand, or any difficulty walking, rising from a chair, climbing stairs? Have you fallen at all? That's the F, right? And so if you score basically if you don't score a perfect score on that one, you're probably into the range of like, okay, we really need, you're at high risk essentially.
Yeah.
And because we want you like easily clearing all of those things at any age. But no, I fully agree with you that having a dedicated being the key term, being just active isn't necessarily good enough from the avoidance of muscle loss piece.
Yeah.
Dedicated strength training regimen is of paramount importance.
Sure. I want to add, there's always the question about like testing methodology, especially with muscle stuff. People are, is it body composition? Is it strength? I'm going to be clear here. It's both, right? There are metabolic benefits from having more muscle mass, right? Even if the function isn't great on it, having more is going to be better. I'll say it. I've said it before. I will continue to say it. You should look to overdrive, right? Take advantage of your genetic threshold. Whatever the most amount of muscle your body will hold naturally is a good amount of muscle, right? And then strength testing is equally as important. So, right, you can use your InBody to get your composition testing done, but you should be on that structured strength training. You should be progressing. You should be getting stronger. You shouldn't be staying the same or getting weaker. If you are, you need to revisit what this training routine looks like. You need to revisit whether or not you're adequately fueling your body. You need to look at sleep, right? There are things we know for sure that will negatively affect this, right? But when it comes down to like what's more important, both. They're both important. We are not allowed to just choose, right? You have to be specific on this. You have to be clear about this is the expectation: more strength, more muscle. And I wanted to quickly touch on one thing. You said, clinically, medically, you hear a lot of people say things like, I'm active, I move around, I do these things, right? I do hear that as well, right? But typically I'm at the outcome phase of that conversation of like, oh yeah, I'm this, but I'm also now strength training, right? By the time they come see me, we're kind of working on this solution. I suspect that you're identifying the problem at your stage. And for somebody who's like adamant about like, I'm not going to go to a gym, I'm not going to go do strength training, whatever reasons you have, that's none of my business. I'm not going to get involved, but I still need you to do some amount of strength training. And if that literally means getting 2 like Home Depot buckets and filling them with sand and just like carrying them during the week, we're talking about compressive force here, people. Like, pick up something heavy and carry it around for a while. Squat with it, push with it, wheelbarrow, I don't care, but you need to move heavy things. You got to put that load on your skeleton. It's just not a negotiation. You just can't go without it and expect to live a high quality life.
And our bodies are really made for that. I think I might be getting this fact wrong, but if I recall correctly, humans are among the most efficient carriers of things, right? In terms of our grip strength and our ability to load weight on our back and spine, and compared to like any other animal, like our grip and lifting strength and carrying strength to weight ratio is, I think, maybe the highest of any mammal. And so I'm going to fact check that, and we can put it in the show notes. But either way, the point stands that this is I fully agree with you. It's something you need to be doing, lifting heavy things. That is how your body knows to overcompensate the next time and build muscle mass, right? You have to load it. You have to stress the body. Otherwise, you just become weak and soft.
I love that. All right. Rapid fire, last 2 to 3 minutes here, right? Are you ready? Whatever
ready.
you say is now the law. All right. So don't mess
no.
it up. Oh, no. All right. Sarcopenia. Is it reversible? Yes or no?
Yes.
Progressive overload, training systems, lift more over time or lift less?
Lift more over time.
Creatine. What do you think?
5 grams of creatine monohydrate daily for most people is great. Check with your provider to make sure it's okay for you, but it does not hurt the kidney. Make sure you're checking a cystatin C if your creatinine goes up in the blood.
I love the extra long tag on that. Recovery periods, sleep, how much?
7 to 9 hours of sleep, ideally, of a sleep time, not in bed time, a sleep time.
Sleep time. Also
no less
good
than
thing
that.
to track.
You're not allowed. Yep.
All right. That's what we have time for today. I got to let you go, Doc. That was awesome. I feel like we could probably do 17 more episodes about sarcopenia, but I hope people walk away with the enthusiasm for strength training that we both have, and that they understand that this is not a tisk type of episode, but just please, it's more of a beg type of episode. You got to do it. You got to.
Right. Whether you're our patients or not, you got to be doing it, and we hope you are. And maybe one of these days we'll actually, if I can get my technology savvy skills, we'll get you kind of demonstrating some stuff too. If we can do like a live episode together.
Whoa,
at some
we're
point
getting
down the line.
crazy now.
Just a crazy brain. You said what I said was law, so I'm going to take advantage of that, and hopefully we can make that happen. If not, we'll just keep, producing high quality content like this. But this was a fun discussion, and I'm still all jazzed up about it. Oh my goodness.
Well, I appreciate the time. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to listen. Again, I'm Derek Marcette. This is Dr. John Liss, and this is Staying Active. Thanks, guys.